Welcome back to Real Truth, Real Justice with LindsMac and MEGHAN Walsh. Last week we discussed the prologue of John Walsh's book Tears of Rage, as well as the beginning acknowledgments and etc. We ended on perhaps the thought of who this friend was, in which identified Adam's supposed found head. This week we will discuss more on who this friend was, how was he connected, and how important he will become in John's narrative. Then we will read a couple more chapters per, say, 1 and 2, with chapter 1 being entitled Auburn. Stay with us, because this will be a lengthy, long ride, Clyde.
Silence, and in the naked light I saw 10,000 people maybe.
I don't know what else I can say, but appreciate your time and your interest, and I hope you can get the word out.
Well, I think that I remember hearing you say that Adam said that you were his hero, and I think you may become America's hero.
Well, that's nice of you to say that.
Becky, we thank you very much.
Disturb the sound of silence.
Well, here we are, and now you get to meet John Monahan, John Walsh's old boss manager at the Diplomat Hotel. And remember what John said in his book, a very close and dear friend. In other words, he should have said best friend due to how we will be continuing reading throughout John's book as he references him always as Monahan. Yep, he's the one who identified Adam's head, as we read in the prologue of John's book. Oh, and John describes in his book, remember when the close friend aka John Monahan was in the autopsy room? He did not immediately recognize the child as Adam. Monahan identified the remains after he asked the medical examiner to open the mouth, at which point he saw a small emerging tooth. Remember, he asked, part the lips. John Monahan had a son also, in which his son, named Michael Monahan, attacked a teenager with a machete 3 days after Adam was kidnapped in 1981. Then you have James Campbell, Reeves' 25-year-old live-in lover of 4 years. Moved out 3 weeks prior to Adam disappearing from Sears. Interestingly enough, James Campbell, yes, Reeves' lover, then moved in with Michael Monahan. The Hollywood County Police didn't find this suspicious, though, and quickly but surely, Michael Monahan, James Campbell, Rev Walsh, John Walsh, and John Monahan were all ruled out as suspects. And disturbingly, way too soon to be ruled out so early on in the case, when there was still lots of work to be done. Around the same time frame, there was also another friendly buddy, living with John Monahan, named Bernie Hirabarn. Keep that name in mind because when we get to him, your head will start spinning as mine did when we discovered him in an old police report that was reported in 1996. Phew, be ready for that one! Fast forward to 2008. When the Adam Walsh case supposedly closed, though not solved, and the case files were available upon request. But only after were they available after a few driven John and Rive fought against releasing Adam's case file to the public in 1996, but the judge overruled them and they were released anyway. Why would you fight that if you wanted your son's case solved? The identification of the victim was based on a comparison of Adam's dental chart and a visual ID by John Monahan. However, none of the necessary documentation was in the medical examiner's office files. Let me be crystal clear here. No copy of Adam's dental chart. None of Adam's dental x-rays. No x-rays of the mouth of the found child. No forensic dental consultation report to affirm the ID. And no completed signed autopsy report narrative. Most importantly, though, is the fact that there were no dental x-rays which would have definitely proven whether the remains were Adam's. No forensics to see here? Sorry? We will just go ahead and believe Monahan's visual on that. Yeah. Okay. So how could John Monahan positively identify this boy's supposed head found as Adam's? How?
Chapter 1.
On Sunday mornings when my father, Gentleman Jack Walsh, genuflected in his best blue serge suit and took his seat in the front pew of St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church for Mass and Holy Communion, he was sometimes not accompanied by his boys. It's not that there was any antipathy on our part. It was just that his sons, my younger brother Jimmy and I, were ordinarily in the back row with the old women and nuns, wearing the black eyes and split lips that we'd picked up in fist fights the Saturday night before. Once in the 1970s, Monahan and I were in New York City on business and went to a great Spanish restaurant at 52nd and Broadway. We were walking along and 4 guys tried to roll us. I went for the first guy, whacked him on both ears, crack, and he went down for the count. Then I turned on the second guy, who was a lot bigger than me, and almost put him through the window of Gallagher's Steakhouse. Monahan and I both spent time in the ring, and neither one of us backs down. I did not learn to fight from my father. His given name was John, like mine, but he was known either as Gentleman Jack, or, more often, by his nickname, which was Adam. It was always "Good morning, Adam," and there goes Adam Walsh. I don't really know why that name stuck. Maybe because it seemed as if he was such a premier guy. First in everything. He had been drafted out of Notre Dame when he was 20 to serve in the Air Force in World War II, and he went on to become a B-24 bomber pilot in the Pacific, the first lieutenant in a crew of 12. Later, he entered Tokyo with the Army of Occupation, and I'm sure saw a number of things that he would rather not have seen. When he finally came home from the war in 1946 to our hometown of Auburn, a pristine town in the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, my father never wanted to leave. He had seen the violent side of the world and wanted no part of it brought into the big clapboard house on Lake Avenue. My dad was a role model for all of us, me, the oldest, born the day after Christmas, 1945. My wife, Reeve, who would not enter the picture for quite some time, says that I consider it an affront that I was not born on December 25. Then there was Jimmy, a year and a half younger, my younger sister Jane, and our late-in-life Irish Catholic, mistake baby brother Joe, who wasn't born until Jane was in 3rd grade. Jane was beautiful, an all-around great girl. Dad always said, "Don't ever lay a hand on your sister Jane, or you will pay 10 times the penalty." And we did. My brother and I tormented this girl. We tied her to a tree and cut off big chunks of her hair. But that was just what you did to your sister. You teased and tormented her. To this day we love her, and she loves us, and it all worked out in the end. She gets to blame us for the rest of our lives. He was a tall, handsome guy with black curly hair, and he loved to wear nice clothes. "Put your best foot forward," he'd always say, "because you never know who you'll run into when you go out on your way." He wasn't flamboyant, but he was elegant, and a bunch of his friends tried to get him into politics. He just never had that kind of ambition. All he was ever interested in, really, was staying at home and spending time with the family. My mother was too nice a person ever to be the family disciplinarian. She had grown up in the big house on North Street, where a lady, not long after that, his wife, Grandma Callahan, died when her 3 kids were still teenagers. They couldn't run the estate by themselves, so it was handed over to lawyers who promptly ran it into the ground. By the time the war was over, everybody was broke. But my uncle started the business up from scratch again, beginning with 1 truck, Callahan Trucking. It was always a big deal when they'd go to Pennsylvania to get each new truck. Only the best Mack trucks, and of course all the trucks had Kelly green shamrocks painted on them. You had to hand it to them. They built the business back up again from nothing into a huge concrete-making company. My mother's family had had its rough spots, but it was still refined compared to my father's. He grew up on Tipperary Hill in Syracuse, an Irish neighborhood where the traffic lights are green on top instead of red. His father was a rough-and-tumble guy who had a cash register store and 4 Irish sons. Maybe that's where Jimmy and I inherited it. We were always just such hell-raisers. Outside the house, Jimmy and I always stuck up for each other, but inside we tried to kill each other every day. Mom used to call us Cain and Abel. Once we got into a fight in the kitchen and just about destroyed it, knocked the roast on the floor, and broke some plates that had been handed down for generations. But fighting was a thing in those days. It's a testosterone thing, a male bonding thing that women will never in a million years understand. We just loved to roughhouse. We called it roughing up. In those days you didn't have guns and you didn't have knives. You had your fists, and you definitely settled your scores of honor. There was always some guy who'd have one too many beers and decide he wanted to take on the Walsh brothers. Those were epic rights. And then there were the fights over girls. I don't know why girls wanted to hang around us, but they did, especially the pretty ones. Girls love bad boys, and I'd get caught all the time, sneaking out of their houses, parking with them in cars, bringing them into the living room. Then fathers wanted to kill me, as did their brothers, and there were lots of "you keep your son away from my daughter" confrontations. But those never worked. It only made the girls want to see you more. In those days, there was always something going on at our house. It was full of people all the time, usually around the dining room table, eating. I fought over girls. I fought for my honor. I fought to protect Jimmy. And sometimes I fought for the love of fighting. My good friend John Monahan, an erudite Irishman, thinks that it has everything to do with heritage. You can't understand me, he says, unless you understand my Irish pride. It's not so much about ego. It's just that I can't abide anything derogatory being said about my family. Once, when he was listening over the radio to a plane going down, all the crew members were fighting over the parachutes, screaming and trying to jump out of their burning plane. My father always said that the reason he survived the war was because his own crew had been so disciplined. He had made them drill and rehearse constantly, just constantly. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? What do we do? What's the plan? My dad was a hero. He had medals, lots of them, for bravery under fire. And what he told me was to always be prepared. Eddie Miles. In those days, there was always something going on at our house. It was full of people all the time, usually around the dining room table, eating. My mother baked something nearly every day, and she fed legions of kids. Pot roast, meatloaf, spaghetti. My dad's big hobby was befriending kids who had non-participatory parents. His philosophy was that it was better having everybody at our house and knowing what was going on than worrying about us at somebody else's house unsupervised. For a long time, I wasn't aware of much that took place beyond our house. I was so wrapped up in puberty that I didn't really pay attention to what was going on in the rest of the world. But I do remember the day that my father brought home Eddie Miles. Eddie Miles was a poor kid who lived in the downtown part of Auburn. It was not far from my father's office, where he had taken over the cash register business from his father. There was one house on that street. This little boy lived in there, and the whole family was so poor. Of course, Eddie would always be out in front of my father's store, and my dad would notice him and take him for an ice cream. He felt so sorry for that little boy who had no chance in life. Nobody really cares about him, Dad would say. Of course, the Mileses had no car, so Dad would always take Eddie for a ride with him. That's how Eddie got up to our house. My dad would say, "Eddie, would you do an errand for me?" And then he would just sort of take Eddie along. Eddie Miles's father was always trying to work and always losing his job. Eddie was the oldest. He was dirty and poor, not the type of kid we associated with. Then one day, Eddie Miles did something incredibly stupid. He jumped into the river off the Big Lake Avenue Bridge. Not only did he not know how to swim, but he also broke both of his legs. Somebody fished him out of the water, and the doctors put him in a body cast. Eddie was going to live all right, but after that, things really went downhill. You can't take a shower with a body cast on, and nobody was taking care of Eddie. On top of everything else, he was really starting to stink. So one day when my brother Jimmy and I were about 10 and 11, my dad brought Eddie Miles out to our house. We couldn't figure it out. We thought it was really an intrusion, this kid from the city coming into our nice house, and my dad showing him all our sports trophies. Jimmy and I went out of the room and started talking about it. What the hell is Dad bringing that kid in here for? He stinks, and he's showing him all our personal stuff. Evidently, my father overheard us, because about 2 minutes later he found us and took us out of Eddie's earshot and really let us have it. "Let me tell you two something," he said, as angry as I'd ever seen him. "I'm going to tell you right now that you don't know how lucky you are. You live on this lovely street by the lake, not because of anything you've done, but because of the luck of the draw. But for the grace of God, my boys, you could be Eddie Miles yourselves. You had nothing to do with being born into this family, and this boy had nothing to do with the fact that he was born into the situation he was. I don't ever want to hear you talk that way again." I don't really know how I got from that point to the way I later became. Somewhere along the line, I began to feel that I was supposed to take care of everything, that it was my job to look out for the family and my brothers and sister. It's a feeling that has stayed with me my whole life. I don't know if it comes from being Irish or Catholic or both. Maybe I just believed that I was better than anybody at almost everything, so if anyone was in trouble or something was going wrong, no one would be able to fix things the way I could. That everything was my responsibility, that it was my job to be in charge of the world. I don't really know where it all came from, but it was there, and it was apparently pretty obvious, even early on. My mother remembers that not long after Joe was born, when I was about 14, she was driving with me in the car someplace, and I said to her, "You know, Mom, you and Dad are a little old to be having a kid, and I just want you to know that if anything happens to you both, I'll take care of Joe." Now, I want to pause a minute and get you guys to comment below on the last two paragraphs I just read to you. John seems pretty self-centered, doesn't he? Well, stay seated because there is way more of that to come. We have a lot to discuss after this read tonight.
Within the sound of silence, and in the naked light I saw 10,000 people maybe.
I don't know what else I can say, but appreciate your time and your interest, and I hope you can get the word out.
Well, I think that I remember hearing you say that Adam said that you were his hero, and I think you may become America's hero.
Well, that's nice of you to say that.
Next week on Real Truth, Real Justice, we will be discussing the next chapter in John's book, entitled Reveille. Stay tuned because that is when more chaos begins. Like, subscribe, and also comment so we can get this out there to more people. And don't forget also to sign the petition for Megan's children to be returned. We really need your help. Wowza, I just realized
we need your help to track down his suspected killer just steps from a police station.
that's another main line of John's on America's Most Wanted Crazy, right? See you guys next week.